Good afternoon to you. Mark Suttoth, HurricaneTrack.com, here with your Hurricane Outlook and discussion for Monday, the 13th of July, 2015. A lot to go over today, so let's get right into it. First, the sea surface temperature anomalies map. Clearly, the El Nino sticking out here along the equatorial tropical Pacific. Also notice the southeast Pacific Ocean right up against the coastline here, and then all the way up into the North Pacific, running substantially above the long-term average. Very interesting weather phenomenon and oceanographic phenomenon shaping up as we go through the next several months. Probably going to have several very large, violent hurricanes in this region. Some of that moisture undoubtedly going to get up into this part of the United States and Mexico, probably in August and September. And it's going to be a real interesting pattern developing for that area. Have to watch out for Hawaii, as the water is warm all around Hawaii relative to normal, a little bit warmer than it should be. Notice in the Atlantic, this is interesting, we've warmed the water temperatures off the coast of Africa to, above normal here. You can see on the scale, clearly above normal, several hundred miles west of the west coast of Africa. And then you have your cold water pool relative to average between that region and the Caribbean. And then the largest area of positive anomalies continues to be outside of the deep tropics, and this is where Claudette has formed right in here, which we'll get to in just a minute. It's interesting too, because back in 2002, I was just going back and looking at some old sea surface temperature anomalies maps in the archive. You had an El Nino back in 2002, but it was rather weak and more out in the central Pacific. Your eastern Pacific here was a lot colder than it is now. But what I wanted to draw your attention to is how cold the Atlantic was overall compared to how it is now. So this is what it was like back in 2002. Notice all this blue in here, and compare that to what we have today. There's a decent amount of blue, but overall the Atlantic seems to be really warm compared to what it was in 2002. You see the difference there? There's just not as much orange, and there's just a lot more blue. Clearly, this sort of horseshoe pattern right here of blue that we don't seem to have today. It's kind of filled in and blocked through here in the Northeast Atlantic. And I bring that up because I've been reading tweets about how the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation, or what we call the AMO, is the coldest that it's ever been in modern times, or something like that. I don't understand how that could be when you can go back and look at a snapshot. Maybe it's an average, and since this is a snapshot from today, maybe that's what it is, and I'll give them credit for that. But it just seems weird that you can go and look at satellite imagery of sea surface temperature departures from normal, and you can clearly see that in 2002 the Atlantic was quite a bit colder overall than it is today. So just something that made me go, that's interesting. Moving on, the El Nino continues to strengthen. You remember I've been talking about this large area of cold water in the subsurface. Well, it's beginning to shrink away. Alas, the westerly wind bursts, that strong Madden-Julian oscillation and westerly wind burst activity doing its work here, downwelling the water in the western Pacific, literally pushing the water downward. That's what it means. And so you're able to warm the subsurface above where it should be. And now we're starting to see another pool of warm water develop here in the west central Pacific, and the pool of warm water in the eastern Pacific still very much intact, 6 degrees Celsius or so above normal right in here. And this El Nino is really going to be interesting to watch over the coming months, especially if it becomes the strongest in recorded history. Now that only goes back really to the late 70s, early 80s with good satellite technology, and really good satellite and ocean technology in the 90s and the early 2000s. So it's not like we're talking about 300 or 400 years of history that this is stronger than. We just don't know. But it is getting very strong in the Pacific here, and it's going to be an interesting topic of conversation over the coming months. Now let's look at actual sea surface temperatures. This is the Atlantic, and this is important because we have Claudette sitting out here over very warm water. It's amazing to think that right up here around Cape Cod, the ocean was frozen into a slushy, just a few months ago, if you think about it, February and March, it was frozen. And now just south of there, by only 200 miles or so, the water temperatures are in the low 80s. Just remarkable. Right along the coast, water temperatures in the low to mid 80s. The Gulf of Mexico kind of changing around a little bit. We've lost some of these extreme, ridiculous, not anomalies. The Gulf is certainly warmer than it should be in a lot of areas. But the actual temperature, it was absurd. It was about 90 degrees here in and around Tampa Bay. Now that has shifted over to southwest Louisiana, and the water temperatures here going up some into the 29, 30, 31, 32 Celsius category. We're talking 87, 88, 89, and 90 degrees right along the surface of the water down to probably 10, 15, 20 feet or so. Very, very warm water. So waters are primed and ready to go. We just don't have any major impulses to take advantage of it, and you typically don't in this part of July. So let's look at what's going on out there. This is a great map from our storm pulse and risk pulse setup that we have on our client services site. You see Enrique here in the open waters of the Pacific. We won't worry about that at all. We do have Dolores here off the coast of Mexico with some tropical storm watches up, just in case there are tropical storm conditions on that part of the Mexican coastline. We'll look at the track of Dolores closer in just a moment. This is now Tropical Storm Claudette. It has strengthened. So speaking of that, we can take a look here at the Atlantic Basin shot from the National Hurricane Center. Here's the track map. Actually, I think I've already got it ready to go. I'll show you that in just a moment. We'll get to it. It's sitting right over here in this tab. I want to show you a satellite picture of the deep tropics, first of all. Very strong upper level feature here, what we call a tropical upper tropospheric trough, and it has closed off an upper level low, and you have very strong southwesterly winds along the south side of it, and just not very favorable conditions at all. But look at that tropical wave, and there you can clearly see it's just very dry and stable out here, so nothing really has a chance to develop. Now I do want to show you the map here. We'll go ahead over to the Claudette track map. A remnant dying storm threat to the Canadian Maritimes up here. Other than that, it's not too big of a deal. Claudette, I know I have a satellite picture that I can pull up. I want to show you. We can just go to this one. And it moved off of the coast of the Carolinas over the weekend as a complex of thunderstorms. It was very, very, I could actually see the tops of those storms here over Pamlico Sound down in my office here in Wilmington. Now that's moved off over the warm waters, anomalously warm, warmer than they should be, of the western Atlantic, and thus we do have Tropical Storm Claudette, fairly small in size. Again, going to make its way up into the Canadian Maritimes, it looks like, as a post-tropical system over those colder waters that do exist in the North Atlantic, and that'll be that. It'll add a few ACE points, accumulated cyclone energy points, to the overall total. Top winds are already 50, so it'll add a few ACE points to the total. Remember, Colorado State University, for example, forecasting a total ACE score, if you will, of 40 for the season. We're at about 4 right now. Claudette will add a couple of more, and we'll see what happens. It's the third named storm of the season, and it's only July 13th, but it's non-tropical in origin, so don't make too much of it being the third named storm already, and we're not even to mid-July just yet. Now, in the Pacific, as I was mentioning, Dolores here, close enough to the coast of the Mexican Pacific side that watches are needed because of heavy rain and the potential for tropical storm conditions. But the really great news here is Dolores will gradually move off to the northwest and die out over the little bit colder, more stable air mass and waters underneath of the eastern Pacific over the next several days. What's the future hold? Well, this is interesting. The GFS and its ensemble members indicating a pretty good rise in MJO activity in the Atlantic Basin area, phases 1 and 2, over the next couple of weeks. So we'll have to watch and see if that comes to fruition. On the other hand, the Euro, not quite as enthusiastic, takes the MJO activity into the null region here, and then tries to amplify it only so slightly in phase 2 over the next couple of weeks. So I guess if you blended them, and got kind of an average, maybe you'd have something coming out in this region a little bit. I don't know. We'll see. The euro tends to do a little bit better job overall, but you never know. So we might have a couple of more systems develop, but they're more than likely going to come from frontal systems coming off the mid-Atlantic states. Maybe something trying to work with what's called a trough split down in the northeast Gulf before the month's over. So don't be surprised if we have a couple of weak, non-tropical origin. That means they're not coming from large pockets of warm energy from Africa, these tropical waves, more so these frontal systems, these waves of low pressure that come off the United States, a convective complex of thunderstorms, a little trough of low pressure off the mainland. That's more common in El Nino years, and so you get smaller, more rapidly developing systems than these larger envelopes of energy that come off of Africa. So don't be shocked if we add a couple of more named storms to the list in the Atlantic before the month of July is over. Just exactly where and when remains to be seen. All right, well, that's it from me for today. I'll be back tomorrow because we do have an active storm in the Atlantic and enough going on in the Pacific that we'll do this update at least through Wednesday, and then we'll see how things stand for the rest of the week and beyond. Sometimes there's just not much to talk about, so we don't do the update every day. Wouldn't make much sense. All right, have a good rest of your Monday. If you're in the stormy area of the southeast, stay indoors if you hear the thunder outside. I don't want you struck by lightning, because then you can't enjoy the tropical discussion that we do here. All right, have a good rest of your afternoon. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com. I'll talk to you again tomorrow.